Welcome to a deep dive into one of Springfield, Missouri's most unsettling chapters. Before we begin, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and the exact time you're listening. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel and when they reach you. The Springfield Grand Opera House once symbolized the city's ambition, a shining mark of culture built in 1883 by railroad tycoon Edward Stilwell. With marble pillars, gold leaf details, and French chandeliers, it was meant to bring big city elegance to the Ozarks. But by the winter of 1897, that same grand building had become something people crossed the street to avoid. County records tell us that between March and November of that year, 5 performers connected to the Opera House were committed to the Missouri State Hospital for the insane, and 3 more simply disappeared. While newspapers treated these as separate tragedies, letters later found between the Springfield police chief and the governor suggest a much darker truth was being covered up. Stilwell's vision had been clear. He wanted to transform Springfield from a rough frontier town into a place of art and refinement. The Opera House was built to rival the theaters of St. Louis and Chicago, though on a smaller scale. Its 4-story limestone front featured classical carvings of Apollo and the Muses, while the interior glowed with red velvet seats and crystal chandeliers. The stage was state-of-the-art for its time, built to handle elaborate scene changes and effects that could transport an audience into another world. Opening night in October 1883 was a spectacle the governor attended. Reporters filled the balcony, and the front page of the Springfield Daily Herald was devoted to describing every lavish detail. Yet hidden in private letters between Stilwell and architect Frederick Chamberlain were warnings. Chamberlain wrote in June 1882 that workers refused to dig in the north corner of the foundation, claiming they heard voices underground. He dismissed it as superstition or gas escaping from limestone, but local crews quit forcing Stilwell to bring in outside laborers. The public explanation was unstable soil. The whispers of something unnatural beneath the old courthouse grounds spread fast. The first real sign that those rumors might have held weight came in February 1897, when celebrated soprano Adelaide Thurston arrived from St. Louis to star in Madame Butterfly. She was vibrant, admired, and reportedly in perfect health. But within 3 weeks, she was found wandering the backstage corridors at 3 a.m, whispering about voices that sang when no one was there. What began as Springfield's proudest symbol of progress was quickly becoming its darkest mystery. Within just 3 weeks of her arrival, Adelaide Thurston was discovered wandering the dark backstage halls of the Springfield Grand Opera House at 3 a.m, whispering about voices that sang when no one else was there. Her presence in Springfield had been a major triumph for the theater. At 32, Adelaide had already earned acclaim in New York and Chicago, and her decision to perform in this growing Midwestern city was taken as proof that Springfield was becoming a legitimate cultural hub. Those who met her described her as striking rather than traditionally beautiful, with commanding dark eyes and a magnetic energy that drew every gaze in the room. Her voice, crystalline and full of haunting depth, could shift from joy to sorrow in a single breath, leaving audiences captivated. The Daily Herald's critic wrote that her first rehearsal brought several members of the orchestra to tears. For the first 10 days, everything seemed routine. Theater manager William Hargrove's logs mention only minor issues, a lighting malfunction, a petty argument among chorus members, and slow ticket sales for a Wednesday matinee. Adelaide kept to herself, dining alone to protect her voice and spending long hours perfecting her arias. Then on March 8th, a stagehand named Robert Mitchell sent Hargrove a brief note. Miss Thurston asked again if we've been letting anyone use the stage after hours. She says someone's been singing her parts before she arrives, like an echo that hasn't stopped. He assured her that no one had access to the building without permission. But the question lingered. The Opera House itself stood on the site of the old county courthouse, which had burned down mysteriously in 1880. City records show that Stillwell's construction crews had dug nearly 30 feet deep for the new foundation, supposedly to build storage and mechanical rooms. But a letter written in 1882 by former courthouse clerk Elias Dawson hints at something else. "They dig where they ought not," he warned his brother. "Some things buried should remain so." The courthouse's destruction was officially blamed on lightning. Yet eyewitness accounts from the night watchman described flames erupting from the basement, spreading too fast, as if fueled by something unnatural. Minutes from county meetings in 1879 mention unusual conditions in the basement and requests for funds to secure restricted areas after several disappearances in Springfield. 4 young men gone without trace. Locals whispered that the missing had been held in the courthouse cells for minor crimes and never released. In one redacted passage from Dawson's letter, he wrote, "The sounds from below continued even after we removed the last of them. Judge Harmon ordered the lower cells sealed. Said no good would come of what had taken root down there." Perhaps the fire was Providence's way of keeping it buried. Adelaide's mental state declined quickly after that. Stagehands heard her singing alone at odd hours, yet when they checked, the stage was empty. Hargrove initially dismissed these claims as nerves or performer superstition, but his private journal, now held in the Springfield Historical Society, shows rising alarm. "Miss again complains of voices," he wrote. "No one else hears them." Suggested consultation with Dr. Leland. By mid-March, Adelaide had been replaced by her understudy after she was found sitting in the orchestra pit at dawn, surrounded by torn program sheets covered in the same musical phrase scrawled over and over, a melody no one recognized and that appeared in no known opera. Dr. Thomas Leland's medical notes, unsealed decades later, describe her symptoms with clinical detachment, insomnia, anxiety, and what he called auditory hallucinations of musical structure. His entry from March 12th reads, "Patient insists the voices are not imagined. Claims they sing in harmony with her, but only within the theater. Displays fear when pressed to describe them." During her examination, doctors found Adelaide Thurston exhausted, but free of fever or any clear physical cause for her delirium. Dr. Leland prescribed chloral hydrate to help her sleep and advised a temporary break from the stage. Yet her behavior continued to disturb those around her. Eliza Montgomery, her understudy, later told the Springfield Republican that Adelaide had started scribbling strange additions in her sheet music, new vocal lines that didn't exist in the original composition. She claimed these harmonies were vital to the piece, though no one else could hear them. When conductor Mr. Phillips refused to incorporate her changes, Adelaide became distraught, insisting the true music was being silenced. The breaking point came on March 16th. Night watchman Samuel Cleary found her at 4:30 a.m., sitting in the orchestra pit, surrounded by shredded program pages covered in musical notation. According to his police statement, she didn't seem to recognize him at first and whispered that she was taking dictation from unseen performers. "She kept telling me to be quiet so she could hear them properly," Cleary said. She claimed they were singing from beneath us and she had to get it all down before morning. The scraps showed the same few bars written over and over, with slight variations each time, as if she were trying to perfect something. When Dr. Leland arrived, Adelaide reportedly told him, "They've been here all along, doctor. Not echoes, not memories. They're rehearsing constantly beneath us, perfecting their performance. I can hear them more clearly now. They want me to join their company." That afternoon, she was transported to the Missouri State Hospital, diagnosed with acute musical mania, a condition occasionally noted among performers and often blamed on the pressures of artistic life. The Opera House carried on with its season, despite the whispers. Eliza Montgomery stepped into the lead role. At first, she dismissed Adelaide's experiences as the byproduct of exhaustion. But within weeks, she began to hear it too. A perfect harmony rising from somewhere beneath the stage. She told friends the voices sounded almost familiar, but somehow wrong. Though she finished her run, staff noticed she refused to be in the building alone and would only enter with at least 2 companions. After her final performance, she fled Springfield, leaving most of her belongings behind. A telegram to her family in Chicago, later intercepted by Hargrove and mentioned in his correspondence, read simply, "Cannot stay. The singing follows me even in sleep." Montgomery had arrived without the fanfare that greeted Adelaide, but she had solid credentials from respected Midwest companies. At 28, she was described by the Daily Herald as competent, if not dazzling, with a voice well suited to lighter operas. Initially, she even pitied Adelaide, telling the costume mistress the poor woman had overtaxed herself. Ticket records show attendance dipped slightly after Adelaide's removal, but stabilized during Montgomery's performances. Her private letters to her sister, made public in 1962, reveal how her confidence eroded. On April 2nd, she wrote, "The most peculiar thing happened during last night's performance. During my aria in the second act, I distinctly heard another voice singing along, not from the wings or the orchestra, but as if directly beneath me on the stage. The melody was slightly different, weaving around her own part, with a timbre that seemed to resonate inside her head, rather than through her ears. I asked the others afterward if they'd noticed, but none had she added." By mid-April, the phenomenon was a regular occurrence. In a letter dated April 17th, she confessed, "It happens every performance now, and even in rehearsals, a counter melody that makes me shiver. I find myself listening for it, anticipating where it might alter a phrase." Hargrove insisted it was an acoustical quirk of the building, maybe sound traveling from the street or the machinery below. But Montgomery wrote, "I know the difference between external noise and a trained voice." Stage manager Edward Thompson noted in his production log that Montgomery had begun arriving early and staying late, often found alone on stage, in an attitude of deep concentration, as if straining to hear something at the edge of audibility. On April 22nd, she wrote to her sister again, "I dreamed of Adelaide last night. She was on stage in a costume I've never seen from any production we've done. She was singing that strange counter-melody, but in the dream I understood it. It completes the standard repertoire. It reveals the music behind the music." She beckoned me to join her beneath the stage where the original company rehearses. I woke with that phrase echoing in my mind. The original company. What does it mean? Soon, others began to experience similar disturbances. Thomas Walsh, a baritone from Philadelphia, performing in the Pirates of Penzance, complained of acoustical anomalies during the April run. His roommate violinist, James Carpenter, told their landlady that Walsh would wake in the night humming unfamiliar melodies he claimed had been stuck in his head from rehearsal. These weren't melodies from any Gilbert and Sullivan opera. When fragments of the strange music were found during renovations of the Springfield Grand Opera House in 1959, a music professor from Drury College described them as mathematically precise but emotionally disturbing, using tonal structures that seemed intentionally designed to unsettle the listener. Thomas Walsh, the baritone at the center of this next chapter, was no struggling performer. At 41, he was seasoned, disciplined, and deeply respected within the theater community. He had performed in Philadelphia and New York and was known for his professionalism and steady temperament. The Springfield Republican praised his robust, commanding voice and his ability to bring gravitas to even the most playful of roles. Yet unlike Adelaide Thurston or Eliza Montgomery Walsh's first complaints weren't about ghostly singing. They were about sound itself. According to production notes, he told conductor Frederick Phillips that certain notes in his first act aria seemed to vibrate strangely when sung from particular spots on stage. Phillips reported to theater manager William Hargrove. Mr. Walsh insists that certain phrases downstage right produce an unnatural resonance. I've stood in the house while he demonstrated. I noticed nothing unusual, but his conviction is absolute. Hargrove agreed to adjust Walsh's stage blocking. Within days, though, Walsh claimed the effect followed him, occurring in new positions each time. His roommate violinist, James Carpenter, would later give the most detailed account of Walsh's decline in a statement to Dr. Leland, dated May 3rd. Carpenter said that Walsh had begun keeping a notebook by his bed, waking suddenly in the night to write down musical ideas by candlelight. He said he wasn't composing, Carpenter wrote, but remembering music he'd heard at the opera house. Music that wasn't part of our show, but that seemed to run beneath it like a foundation under the visible structure. Several pages of Walsh's notes were preserved and later donated to the Springfield Historical Society. When Drury College's Dr. Leonard Bernstein, no relation to the famed conductor, analyzed them in 1959. His findings were published in the Journal of Musical Theory. He concluded that while the fragments used standard notation, they formed harmonic relationships that deliberately broke Western musical conventions, creating what he called cognitive interference. Bernstein wrote, "When performed, these sequences generate beat frequencies that interact with the inner ear, producing subtle disorientation, a kind of dizziness or spatial confusion." He also noted troubling psychological effects. Student volunteers who played the pieces reported rising anxiety, restlessness, and an inability to focus on other music afterward. Further investigation into the opera house's architecture deepened the mystery. Frederick Chamberlain, the original architect, had studied acoustical engineering in Vienna and incorporated advanced design principles into the building. Hidden sound chambers beneath the stage and within the walls were intended to enhance the richness of vocal performances. But when the opera house was partially rebuilt after a small fire in 1923, construction workers discovered that these chambers had been heavily altered. The modifications not recorded in any official blueprints formed a complex network of echoing tunnels and resonance cavities extending far deeper than expected, far below the known foundation. Whatever purpose they served, it was clear that someone long after the building was completed had reshaped its acoustics into something far more intricate and far more unsettling. Frederick Chamberlain's education in Vienna had immersed him in the most advanced theories of acoustic design of the late 19th century. European opera houses were experimenting with architectural acoustics, shaping air and stone to carry a human voice across vast halls long before microphones existed. His original plans for the Springfield Grand Opera House reflected this influence, a system of hollow chambers beneath the stage and within the walls of the proscenium that would act as natural resonators, amplifying voices while preserving tonal purity. The blueprints filed with the city in 1882 showed these chambers reaching about 12 feet below stage level, deep but not extraordinary for the era. Construction records, however, tell a different story. Michael Donovan, the foreman overseeing the build, kept a meticulous daily log. Throughout August and September of 1882, he recorded repeated additional excavations, as per architects' verbal instructions, modifications, to the substage areas that never appeared on the official plans. One unsettling note reads, "C insists on access to the deeper chambers. Owner approved extra costs despite concerns." 4 decades later, after a minor fire in 1923 damaged part of the stage, those cryptic remarks took on new meaning. Contractor William Simmons, tasked with repairs, discovered that the opera house's acoustic system extended far beyond what any blueprint described. In his report to the insurance company, he wrote, "Acoustic chambers extend beyond documented depth." Additional tunnels and rooms not on record. Workmanship consistent with original construction, not later additions. Purpose unclear. What troubled Simmons most was the existence of a second hidden network of chambers, running parallel to the main acoustic system, but designed with entirely different principles. These structures appear to cancel, not enhance sound, he observed. Their arrangement makes no sense acoustically. In some cases, they distort frequencies, producing interference rather than resonance. When Washington University engineering professor Harold Mitchell inspected the site in 1924, he came to a startling conclusion. Some of these substage chambers, he wrote, appear intended to produce psychoacoustic effects rather than improve sound quality. His technical report warned that the dimensions of certain cavities could create infrasonic standing waves vibrations below the range of human hearing, but capable of triggering anxiety, vertigo, and even auditory hallucinations in those exposed for long periods. By that summer, the Opera House's reputation began to crumble. Audiences dwindled despite management's efforts to revive interest with lighter fare comic operettas and musical reviews meant to draw crowds through the hot months. A review in the Springfield Republican on July 14th praised the performers' skill, but noted something elusive missing from their shows, technically sound but strangely lifeless, as if the company performs under an invisible pall. Behind the scenes, manager William Hargrove was growing desperate. His letters to Stillwell tried to downplay the decline, blaming warm weather and competition from a traveling circus at the county fairgrounds. But his private journal tells a darker story. There is something oppressive about the building of late, he wrote on June 22nd. Performers complain of fatigue beyond the usual strain. 2 chorus members have left without notice, saying the place makes them uneasy. Phillips cannot keep the orchestra in tune by the final act. Instruments drift as if the air itself shifts around the sound. Even the city's press began to whisper. In a private letter dated July 8th, Springfield Republican editor Samuel Withers cautioned a colleague at the Kansas City Star, "You ask about sending your critic to review our summer production. I would advise against it. Something is amiss in our opera house, though no one dares speak of it directly. Performers who leave Springfield tell strange stories. The opera house, that had once been a monument to culture and progress, was now becoming a place people avoided, discussing aloud its performances. Still staged, its audience still present. But beneath it all, something unseen continued to hum." Hargrove later admitted in his private notes that while he had long dismissed these incidents as theatrical temperament, the consistency of the performers' accounts was impossible to ignore. Even the Springfield Daily Herald's arts reporter, William Pfizer, began documenting oddities in his notebook without realizing he was recording evidence. His entry from July 20th during a performance of The Mikado, Reed's chorus, seemed disjointed tonight, as though following a slightly different tempo during the Act 2 quintet. Could have sworn I heard additional vocal lines weaving through the harmonies, not Sullivan's score, but somehow enhancing it in a disconcerting way. Mentioned this to Phillips afterward. He gave me an odd look and changed the subject. In August, a local mezzo-soprano named Martha Winters joined the company for a supporting role in Carmen. She lasted just 2 weeks. A former child prodigy who had trained briefly in Chicago before returning to Springfield, Martha had maintained her vocal skills while teaching music to the children of the city's elite. At 33, she was considered a reliable local talent. Her husband, James Winters, an accountant at the First National Bank, wrote to his sister in St. Louis, documenting her decline. On August 5th, he described Martha as thrilled to have been cast and practicing constantly, though he noted her remark that the opera house's acoustics were revelatory, allowing her to hear dimensions in the music she'd never noticed. By August 12th, his tone shifted. Martha brought home the orchestral score yesterday and spent the evening marking it with additional notations, he wrote. She says she's completing the music adding lines omitted from the published version. She insists these parts are essential to the full realization of the opera, but cannot explain how she knows them. 4 days later, he reported that Martha no longer slept, working through the night on her transcriptions using a private notation system of her own invention. When he urged her to rest, she became uncharacteristically angry. She accused me of trying to silence them, he wrote. When I asked who she meant, she replied, the original company. They've been rehearsing beneath the stage since before it was a stage. This morning I found her at the piano playing chord progressions that made me profoundly uneasy, though I cannot explain why. On August 19th, the night watchman found Martha in a sealed storage room beneath the stage at 2:00 a.m., a room she should not have been able to enter. The lady had no light yet, was writing as if she could see perfectly, he stated. Around her were pages covered in musical notation and strange symbols. When he asked how she had gotten in, she said they had shown her the way and did not seem to recognize him or understand she was trespassing. Dr. Leland's notes described her as alert but dissociated from surroundings. Patient speaks coherently about music theory, but applies it to compositions not in the standard repertoire. Claims to be transcribing works performed by the original company that rehearses beneath the opera house. When questioned about this company, becomes agitated and insists they were here before the building, before the town. Physically, she showed signs of severe exhaustion, consistent with days of sleeplessness. The most disturbing case arrived in September, with Richard Harrison, a veteran tenor, brought in to help revive the theater's fortunes with a high-profile production of Faust. Harrison was no fragile novice. At 45, he had sung in opera houses from Boston to San Francisco. Praised by the Boston Musical Gazette as a tenor of uncommon purity and expressiveness, particularly suited to roles of psychological complexity. The Daily Herald hailed his engagement as a coup. Initial rehearsals went smoothly. Conductor Frederick Phillips noted Harrison was thoroughly prepared and a steadying influence on the younger cast members. The only unusual comment was Harrison's professional observation that the opera house had interesting acoustics, revealing aspects of the voice not normally audible to the performer. On September 12th, however, he approached stage manager Edward Thompson with an unsettling question. According to Thompson's notes, Mr. H asked if there had been a late-night rehearsal. He claims he heard singing from his hotel room. When told no one had been in the building, he insisted someone must have been using the stage. Said the voices were too clear to have come from elsewhere, and the music was operatic. But unlike anything in our current repertoire, 3 days later, Harrison requested permission to study the theater's acoustics after hours. Hargrove agreed. The night watchman later reported that Harrison spent long stretches sitting in different seats, humming brief phrases, then falling silent, as if listening to something no one else could hear. By September 20th, Harrison had begun keeping a journal of what he called the night performances. A fragment preserved in the Springfield Historical Society archives contains entries like 2:15 a.m., tenor aria unfamiliar composition, virtuosic passage in upper register beyond capabilities of any singer I've encountered. Harmonic structure unconventional but compelling. Voice seems to emerge from beneath stage rather than on it. And later, 3:40 a.m., ensemble piece for 5 voices. Harmonic language unlike anything in current repertoire. Dissonances that should be jarring somehow produce sensation of heightened awareness rather than discomfort. Cannot identify language of libretto syllables familiar, but syntax entirely foreign. Harrison's behavior soon deteriorated during rehearsals. He would stop mid-phrase, claiming to hear counter-melodies absent from the score. During one rehearsal, according to multiple witnesses, he abandoned Gounod's music entirely and began began singing what Phillips later described as a melodic line of extraordinary complexity with intervals and ornamentations I have never encountered in Western music. When the orchestra fell silent in confusion, Harrison reportedly continued for nearly a minute before stopping abruptly and asking, "Can't you hear them? They're singing with me." By early October, Richard Harrison had taken to sleeping in his dressing room, telling colleagues he needed to catch them at it. On the night of October 12th night, watchman Samuel Cleary reported hearing singing coming from the stage area around 2 in the morning. Believing someone had broken in, he investigated but found the stage empty. The sound continued, however, rising faintly from beneath the floorboards. When Cleary accessed the substage area through a trap door, he discovered Harrison sitting in the dark, surrounded by candles arranged in an intricate pattern, singing what the watchman later described as "no melody I've ever heard," with words that didn't sound like any language I know. Cleary's full statement to police, parts of which were omitted from official accounts, contained more chilling details. "The candles were laid out in a pattern that reminded me of musical notation," he wrote. Mr. Harrison sat in the center, eyes closed, singing. The melody shifted constantly, never settling into anything familiar. Most disturbing at times, I could swear I heard other voices joining his, though we were alone in the building. When I called his name, he didn't respond. When I touched his shoulder, he stopped singing and opened his eyes, but didn't seem to know who I was. He only said, "They're getting closer to the surface. Soon everyone will hear them." Harrison was immediately removed from the production and examined by Dr. Leland, who diagnosed him with acute melancholia, accompanied by delusional features. When questioned, Harrison told the doctor, "They're still rehearsing down there, the original company. They were here before the theater, before anything. They're always rehearsing for the performance that never comes." He never performed again and spent the rest of his life institutionalized, dying in 1912. His sealed hospital records, opened in 1960, included transcripts of his later ramblings about a perfect opera that would open the way for the original performers to take the stage again. The case drew national attention from intellectual circles. Dr. William James, the famed Harvard psychologist and philosopher, known for his studies of altered states of consciousness, took particular interest. Although he never visited Springfield, James corresponded with Dr. Leland extensively. In a letter dated November 1897, he wrote, "Your account of the opera singer's delusions is most intriguing, particularly the consistency of the hallucination and its attachment to a specific physical space. One wonders if the building itself, perhaps through infrasonic vibration or some environmental resonance, might be inducing these experiences in otherwise stable individuals." Harrison's hospital records show that for the first year he refused to speak or even acknowledge music. When questioned, he became agitated and warned, "They'll hear me if I talk about it. They'll know I'm here." By 1900, he was more communicative, though his beliefs remained unchanged. A transcript from a 1902 session with Dr. Arthur Nichols recorded him saying, "They're not ghosts, nothing so simple. It's something fundamental to the nature of sound itself. The music they perform restructures perception. They've been rehearsing the same opera for centuries, perfecting it until it achieves its purpose." When Nichols asked what that purpose might be, Harrison replied, "To open the way. Music can create doorways. Doctor, the right combinations of sound can thin the membrane between here and elsewhere." They're almost ready for their public performance. By late October, attention turned to William Hargrove, the Opera House's longtime manager. Staff began noticing changes in his behavior. Uncharacteristic isolation, erratic hours, and claims that he was working on programming revisions. Hargrove had managed the Opera House since its opening in 1883 and was widely respected across the Midwest for his professionalism and cultural vision. Until then, he'd shown no sign of instability. But by autumn of 1897, something had shifted. His secretary, Abigail Winters, later told investigators. He started arriving before dawn and staying long after everyone else had gone home. He said he was catching up on correspondence, but I noticed letters from agents and contractors piling up unanswered. When I asked if he needed help, he told me he was engaged in more important work, but wouldn't explain what it was. Others noticed similar oddities. Stage prop master Henry Davis recalled finding Hargrove standing motionless on the empty stage one morning in mid-October, head tilted as if listening. When I spoke to him, he jumped like he'd been startled, Davis said. He told me he was studying the theater's acoustics. He had a notebook full of symbols and musical markings. But Mr. Hargrove never played an instrument in his life. When Hargrove's office was later examined, investigators found the walls covered with sheets of musical notation and diagrams of the opera house's substructure. Most disturbing of all was a journal labeled The Transmission. In it, Hargrove had recorded fragments of what he believed were musical phrases communicated from somewhere beneath the theater. The entries grew more frantic over time, notes scrawled in uneven handwriting, describing harmonies felt rather than heard. Progressions that arrive fully formed in the mind, and repeated references to a coming performance, for which all others are only rehearsal. Hargrove's recovered journal begins like any other manager's ledger, neat, professional, and practical. The early entries discuss ticket sales personnel schedules and budget shortfalls. But by October 8th, the tone changes. The handwriting grows looser, the language more feverish. Discovered interesting resonance effect in southeast corner of stage 1 entry reads. When certain notes are sung at precise volume, the stage itself seems to respond as if the building were singing back. What started as technical curiosity soon turned into obsession. The pattern is becoming clear, Hargrove wrote days later. What I first took for random acoustic anomalies is actually a form of communication. The building doesn't just enhance sound, it modifies it in deliberate ways. When Harrison sang the high F in his aria yesterday, I heard a harmonic response from beneath the floorboards. No one in the orchestra produced it. By mid-October, Hargrove was mapping what he called response points across the stage spots, where specific notes triggered reactions from the structure itself. His recovered diagram shows the stage overlaid with lines resembling a musical staff, each intersection marked with a pitch. An entry dated October 22nd reads, "Made contact last night. Sang the progression as mapped and received clear response a perfect fifth above my final note sustained for 12 seconds after I stopped singing. No one else present." The sound emerged from the center trapdoor, though it remained closed. Tomorrow, I will attempt the complete sequence. 2 weeks later, on November 2nd, something extraordinary and terrifying occurred. During a rehearsal of The Barber of Seville, the performance was halted when several performers froze mid-song. Conductor Frederick Phillips recalled in his police statement, "We were midway through Act 1 when the soprano stopped singing and looked upward. Before I could speak, the violins faltered, and I heard it too. Voices. Not from the stage or the boxes, but from within the theater itself. The walls seemed to be singing." Phillips, who held a doctorate in music theory from Vienna, later provided a more technical account to the Springfield Republican. The sound, he explained, employed microtonal intervals notes between our standard half steps, forming harmonic relationships that defied Western convention. The dissonance should have been unbearable, yet it resolved in ways that were hypnotically satisfying. The voices seemed to anticipate our music, weaving around our lines like partners in a duet. Witnesses reported a range of physical and emotional effects. Dizziness, tears, euphoria, and waves of inexplicable dread. Assistant stage manager Thomas Gardner later told police, "It wasn't just hearing the sound, it was feeling it. It vibrated through my bones and clouded my thoughts. It was impossible to think of anything else. The rehearsal ended in chaos. Several musicians fled the building. Those who remained sat in silence, trembling. Stillwell, the opera house's owner, was notified immediately and arrived within the hour. His conversation with Hargrove was never officially recorded, but custodian Walter Reynolds, sweeping the lobby nearby, overheard fragments. Mr. Stillwell was furious, demanding explanations, talking about the theater's reputation and finances, Reynolds later told investigators. Mr. Hargrove just kept repeating that it was all working as intended, that this was what the building had been designed for. When Mr. Stillwell threatened to fire him, Hargrove said something that froze my blood. "It's too late for that." That night, Hargrove returned to the theater alone. The night watchman saw him enter around midnight, carrying several leather-bound books and what looked like surveying instruments. He never left. "They're already coming through." Those were the last words anyone recalled William Hargrove saying before the final night. Despite Edward Stillwell's growing unease, Hargrove persuaded him to allow one last attempt to resolve the opera house's strange acoustical phenomena. In a sworn statement given to police on November 4th, Stillwell said Hargrove assured me he understood the source of the problem and could correct it. He claimed it was structural, something involving the resonating chambers beneath the stage, and asked for permission to inspect them thoroughly. Given his long service and his confidence, I granted him until morning. What happened next has been reconstructed from police reports, eyewitness accounts, and later testimony. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, residents living near the Opera House reported hearing what several described as the most beautiful and terrible singing imaginable. The police responding to complaints arrived to find the building locked. When they finally gained entry an hour later, they were met with a scene of chaos. The entire stage had been dismantled, floorboards, ripped up trap doors removed, and a massive hole opened in the center. Of Hargrove, there was no sign. Officer Michael Sullivan, the first on scene, gave a statement that remains one of the most chilling documents in Springfield's history. "The stage was torn apart," he wrote. Boards and planks stacked along the walls. The trapdoor openings had been enlarged to expose a deep cavity beneath. A rope ladder descended into darkness. When we lowered lanterns, we saw chambers extending far deeper than the known basement. The first space matched the expected stage machinery area, but a section of brick wall had been broken through, revealing older stone chambers beyond, constructed from limestone, not brick, and of a different character than the rest of the foundation. The night watchman Samuel Cleary testified that he had left the building around 10 that evening after Hargrove dismissed him, saying he needed to work undisturbed. He was calm but focused, Cleary said. Had several old books with him, looked like blueprints or architectural drawings, and a leather case with tuning forks and a metronome. Said he was going to resolve the acoustical problems once and for all. Across the street, a resident named Mrs. Eleanor Whitman witnessed what may have been the last moments of the manager's life. Unable to sleep, she sat by her window shortly after 3 a.m. and later described hearing music unlike anything I've ever known. It began, she said, with a single male voice singing in an unfamiliar language. Then more voices joined men and women until it became a chorus. The harmony was strange, beautiful, but wrong, like hearing colors that shouldn't exist. It made me feel exhilarated and terrified at once, as if something vast and terrible was about to happen. Mrs. Whitman also reported seeing lights flickering inside the opera house. They weren't gas lamps, she said. They pulsed, glowed from within the building itself, concentrated around the stage area. Then she recalled the singing reached an unbearable intensity. All the voices joined in one sustained chord that made the air shake. Then came a grinding sound, like stone on stone. The light flared brighter than fire and vanished. Then silence. When police in Stillwell entered the building hours later, they found the stage floor gone and a gaping shaft leading deep underground. What they discovered below was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The breached wall opened into a network of chambers extending well beyond the Opera House foundation. The masonry was older, much older than the theater itself, suggesting that the structure predated even the courthouse that once occupied the site. Engineers brought from St. Louis to examine the ruins found that these spaces were not designed for storage or construction stability. They were instead instruments. Each room resonates at a specific frequency, reported consultant Albert Hammond, as though built to amplify precise tones while suppressing others. When a sound is made in the central chamber, it passes through the connecting tunnels, each modifying it slightly before returning, producing harmonic interference patterns of startling complexity. The chambers were arranged in concentric circles around a central vault. Their proportions, Hammond noted, were too deliberate to be accidental in acoustic mechanism rather than architecture. More troubling was the discovery of a second network of passages sealed behind newer stonework. Hargrove had begun breaking through one of these inner walls when he disappeared. The report concluded with a single line that Stillwell underlined in red ink in his personal copy. Whatever these lower chambers were built for their design suggests not performance but invocation. The passages beneath the Springfield Grand Opera House were far older than anyone realized. Geological consultant Edward Barnes determined that they were a hybrid of natural limestone caverns and human modifications, some dating back to the early 19th or even late 18th century, long before Springfield officially existed. Within those subterranean rooms, directly beneath the stage, investigators found clear evidence of Hargrove's final hours. His surveying instruments lay scattered near the central chamber, alongside notebooks filled with bewildering diagrams, where musical notation intertwined with architectural sketches. One page, reproduced in the police report, showed a cross-section of the Opera House labeled not by structure or material, but by pitch, each chamber identified by a musical note, as though the building itself was a kind of instrument waiting to be played. At the center of the lowest chamber stood what Chief Wilson described as a ritual arrangement. Hargrove's tuning forks were set in a perfect circle atop small wooden blocks, with his metronome placed precisely in the middle, ticking steadily at 66 beats per minute. Around this formation, candle stubs had melted completely into puddles of wax, spaced at intervals that acoustic engineer Albert Hammond later confirmed matched the nodal points of the room's resonance pattern. The placement, he noted, would have cast oscillating shadows across the walls, synchronized to the chamber's natural frequencies. There was no sign of Hargrove himself. Only one clue hinted at his fate. Officer Sullivan found his pocket watch still ticking beside a section of wall he had begun to break through. Scratched into the limestone dust nearby was a musical staff bearing a series of unfamiliar notes. Notations no expert could match to any known scale or composition. Stillwell, shaken by what he saw, ordered the lower chambers sealed immediately with concrete and brick. The Opera House reopened that December under new management, its rebirth presented to the public as a simple renovation. The Springfield Republican praised the new production's light-hearted atmosphere, but noted an odd undercurrent. An air of hesitancy hung over the evening, as though both audience and performers feared to give themselves entirely to the music. Robert Caldwell, the new manager from Kansas City, worked hard to restore confidence. In private letters to Stillwell dated January 1898, however, he confessed lingering unease. Performers continued to report strange acoustics, he wrote. Dead spots where voices vanish entirely, and others where even a whisper carries clear as a shout. Several claim their own voices echo back with slight variations, as if mimicked by someone unseen. Stillwell's reply was terse. Address any structural issues quietly. Discourage further speculation. Despite the new season, the Grand Opera House never recovered its prestige. By 1899, attendance had fallen sharply. A vocal coach, Margaret Hughes, wrote to a colleague in Chicago that March, there's something uncanny about this theater. Singers develop unusual tones, harmonics, that shouldn't be possible. When I ask how they achieve them, they say only that the building shows them where to stand. By 1900, Stilwell had reduced operations to weekend performances, supplementing with traveling acts and lectures. His private journal from November that year contained one haunting note. Perhaps Hargrove was right. The building does not wish to be merely a theater. In 1917, the Grand Opera House was converted into a movie theater, a move meant to modernize its image and cut costs. Yet even then the oddities persisted. Pianist Eleanor Foster, who accompanied silent films from 1919 to 1922, later recalled in her memoir, "At times my fingers played patterns I didn't recognize, harmonies that seemed to come from the instrument itself. Beneath my music I could feel another melody, low, steady, almost human, rising from the building." When the Opera House was finally demolished in 1953, to make way for a department store, workers unearthed the sealed chambers. Construction foreman Walter Jenkins documented the discovery in his log concrete barrier, broken through from the chamber side. Hole 3 feet in diameter. No record of access. Found candle wax footprints in dust and markings on the walls resembling musical notation. Chambers appear recently disturbed. Stillwell's son, who now owned the property, ordered the chambers refilled with concrete immediately. But the story didn't end there. 14 years later, in 1967, excavation began for the new Midwest National Bank, requiring deep foundations for its underground vaults. At nearly 40 feet below street level, workers struck something unexpected, a buried stone structure not found on any city records. Inside, they discovered a sealed metal box. The box contained a single parchment score, brittle and yellowed with age, covered in musical notation written in an archaic hand. The composition was examined briefly by a professor from Missouri State University, who described it as a study in harmonic relationships that produce profound psychological discomfort when played. After attempting to have his students perform a few measures, the professor abruptly abandoned the analysis, later claiming the music induced panic and nausea in several participants. He refused to speak further on the matter, stating only that the piece was not meant for human ears. The official report submitted to the Springfield Historical Society in 1967 described the discovery in precise but unsettling detail. Beneath what had once been the stage of the Grand Opera House lay a circular limestone chamber, roughly 15 feet in diameter. Its walls blackened with age and lined with what appeared to be hand-cut acoustic tubes angled toward a vanished ceiling. Most of the chamber was choked with debris from above, yet fragments of the upper structure remained intact, revealing evidence of deliberate acoustic design. The walls weren't merely stonework. They had been shaped to manipulate sound. Amid the rubble, workers found a sealed metal box made of a lead-tin alloy that metallurgist James Harmon identified as typical of 18th century craftsmanship. Inside were objects that defied straightforward classification. A parchment music score, a set of tuning forks forged from an unknown alloy, and a leather-bound journal written in multiple languages. English, French, and an undeciphered dialect with partial resemblance to Algonquian tongues. Linguist Dr. Eleanor Price called it a structured language, but not one that exists in any known record. Dr. Lawrence Werner of Missouri State University's music department was tasked with analyzing the parchment score. His initial report noted that the notation system combines elements of Western musical theory with radical alterations. Instead of the familiar 5-line staff, the manuscript used 12 lines to indicate microtonal divisions and harmonic relationships impossible to represent in standard notation. Some markings, Werner observed, appeared to prescribe not only notes to be played, but the psychological states intended to arise in both performers and listeners. Curiosity overcame caution. Werner assembled 4 graduate students to perform a short 8-measure passage. Their rehearsal was documented, but the experiment was never repeated. 2 students described seeing sound, a form of spontaneous synesthesia, perceiving color and movement with each note. Another said the air seemed to press inward around them as they played. The 4th broke down sobbing mid-performance, unable to continue. Werner's own notes record that the music appears to generate standing waves within human perception itself, altering awareness in ways that cannot be expressed in conventional terms. He ended his report abruptly, concluding only that the composition is incomplete, designed to evoke a reply from something not present in the room. That reply never came. But what followed was equally baffling. The materials Hargrove's journal, The Tuning Forks, and the music score were cataloged for transfer to the State Archives in Jefferson City. On July 3, 1967, Courier Joseph Whitman departed Springfield with 3 sealed containers and a signed receipt from archivist Margaret Holloway confirming delivery. Yet when researchers later requested access, the archives reported no record of their arrival. The receipt number matched no entry in Jefferson City's intake logs. Holloway recognized her own signature, but could not recall handling the materials. Both men later gave troubling addenda to their statements. Whitman claimed that throughout the 4-hour drive, he heard faint humming coming from the containers, a tune that repeated itself over and over. Not anything I knew, but it stayed in my head for weeks. The night watchman on duty that evening, Edward Crowley, logged unusual sounds from the intake room around 2 a.m., paper rustling and faint metallic tapping. When he checked, the room was empty, though the door was found unlocked the next morning. The official explanation was bureaucratic error. The items were said to have been misrouted. No other institution ever reported receiving them. They simply vanished. Even after the disappearance, the site itself refused silence. Employees in the newer buildings that occupied the lot, including the Midwest National Bank built in 1968, continued to report strange auditory events. During quiet hours, janitors and guards heard distant singing or a low hum that faded when approached. In 1972, after numerous complaints, bank management hired Harmon and Associates, an acoustic engineering firm, to study the problem. Their confidential report described phenomena that cannot be accounted for by conventional physics. Certain basement corridors produced null point zones where sound ceased entirely directly beside areas where the faintest whisper was amplified to painful levels. The engineers detected recurring resonances, particularly a persistent E-flat tone in the northeast quadrant of the vault level. It would arise without identifiable source, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. Despite multiple renovations and installation of advanced dampening materials, the frequency continued to manifest. If external, the report concluded, the source lies below the foundation and is not mechanical. Bank teller Marion Rhodes, who worked there from 1975 to 1983, gave her own testimony years later. We all knew certain parts of the building were wrong. Down near the old vault, your footsteps wouldn't echo, but sometimes you'd hear them a moment after you stopped walking. I'd be counting money after hours and hear someone humming through the walls. When I told my supervisor, he said, "That's why no one works alone after dark." Researchers have since referred to the Springfield case as an example of architectural psychoacoustics. The possibility that certain structures, whether through intent or accident, can influence human consciousness by the manipulation of sound. Yet others suggest something far simpler and far darker, that what began in the limestone below Jefferson Avenue was never architecture at all, but an invitation that someone long before Springfield existed had already answered. What truly drove those performers to madness? Was it the fever of the stage, the fragile temperament of creative minds exposed to relentless pressure, or something deeper? Something resonating from within the limestone bones of the earth itself? That question haunted generations of researchers, skeptics, and believers alike. By the late 20th century, the mystery of the Springfield Opera House had evolved from a historical curiosity into a cornerstone case study in a new and unsettling field: architectural psychoacoustics. Dr. Eleanor Price, the pioneering MIT researcher who formalized the discipline, devoted an entire chapter of her 1984 work, Resonant Structures Architecture as Instrument to Springfield. She argued that the phenomenon was neither superstition nor mass hysteria, but the measurable result of infrasound acoustic frequencies below the threshold of human hearing that can profoundly alter perception and mood. According to Price's theory, certain geometric configurations, parallel planes, circular chambers or domed ceilings, can trap and amplify low-frequency waves, generating standing vibrations that interact directly with the brain and body. These frequencies, typically between 7 and 12 hertz, have been shown in laboratory studies to induce symptoms identical to those recorded in the Springfield accounts: disorientation, emotional surges, auditory hallucinations, and the overwhelming sense of a presence. Her research team reconstructed a precise scale model of the Grand Opera House using original blueprints and the 1967 excavation data. Acoustic tests revealed that the sub-stage design, particularly the concentric limestone chambers, would have produced an extraordinarily stable infrasonic resonance at around 9.2 hertz. The central cavity, Price concluded, functioned as a vast Helmholtz resonator tuned almost perfectly to the human nervous system's sensitivity threshold. It is, she wrote, a structure that could play its occupants as instruments. If her theory is correct, the opera house itself was not simply haunted. It was harmonic, alive with physical forces capable of manipulating those who performed within it. As for William Hargrove, the man whose obsession with those harmonics consumed him, the record ends in a void. Officially, he remains missing, presumed dead. No remains were ever recovered, despite exhaustive searches of the tunnels and surrounding grounds. But a single clue surfaced decades later. In 1978, during an oral history project on Springfield's theatrical past, researcher Thomas Gardner interviewed Sophia Hargrove, the great-niece of the vanished manager. According to family memory, William's sister received a single letter months after his disappearance, postmarked New Orleans. The note contained only a few lines. "I have found the original company. Their performance is eternal, and now I am part of it. The music continues beneath, behind, and between what others hear." Enclosed was a scrap of music written in the same 12-line notation, later identified in the mysterious parchment recovered in 1967. The family, unnerved, burned the letter soon after. Then, in 1983, new data emerged that cast the story in geological, not mystical terms. A Missouri State University survey of downtown Springfield's subsurface revealed a vast network of limestone caverns running beneath the city and directly beneath the former Opera House site. Lead geologist Dr. Robert Chambers described multiple resonance cavities, natural spaces capable of sustaining low-frequency vibrations for extended durations. In several chambers, simple noises produced whispering gallery effect sounds that seemed to travel impossibly across distance or multiply themselves. Chambers' team confirmed that some sections had been sealed off by 19th century construction, their original extent unknown. Historical land records deepened the strangeness. Surveyor notes from 1820, more than a decade before Springfield's founding, mention an eastern spring where the ground sings. According to these accounts, the Osage guides accompanying the expedition refused to approach, warning that voices rise from the earth at certain moons and that their ancestors forbade answering them. A missionary journal from 1822 echoed this. The locals fear a hollow east of the main spring where the earth itself sings. They say those who join its song are taken below to dwell with the first singers who have been performing since before the world was made. Whatever the truth, the ground beneath Springfield seems to have kept its voice. In the decades since no business or institution occupying the old Opera House site has lasted long, the Midwest National Bank, built there in 1968, suffered chronic acoustic disturbances, low vibrations, phantom echoes, and tonal spikes recorded on equipment, though inaudible to most staff. Employees routinely complained of headaches, vertigo, and anxiety. Musicians among them described an inexplicable pull toward certain tones, as if the building taught them how to hum along. After the bank closed in 1987, a parade of tenants followed retailers, restaurants, offices, none lasting more than a few years. A cafe owner in 1995 told the Springfield Business Journal, "Even when the place was packed, it felt empty. The music nights were the worst. The sound never behaved right. The singers said it felt like someone else was performing with them." By the early 2000s, the property had become little more than a curiosity for local historians and sound engineers. Maintenance supervisor Richard Torres, who has overseen the building since 2002, summed it up in a 2012 interview. "We've had every kind of expert come through: audio engineers, electricians, geologists. They all hear something, but none of them can find it. Some rooms pick up frequencies no human voice can make. Some people can't hear a thing, others swear they can feel it in their bones." He paused before adding, "The northeast basement's the worst. We don't rent it out anymore. Too many complaints about humming, about voices. Everyone says the same thing. It sounds like someone's still rehearsing down there." To this day, no live musical performance has ever been successfully staged on that site again. The Springfield Grand Opera House is gone, its marble pillars and gown gilt balconies reduced to dust, but the resonance remains. And if you stand on Jefferson Avenue in the quiet hours before dawn, some locals swear you can still feel a vibration beneath your feet. Faint as breath, steady as a heartbeat, pulsing in time to a song that has never truly ended. 3 separate sound insulation companies tried to fix the basement of the former Opera House site. None succeeded. The phenomenon persisted. Strangers still recordings made in the rooms, often captured sounds no one heard. During the sessions, faint harmonies and ghostly overtones rising from the background noise only upon playback. Of the performers who survived Springfield in 1897, most never returned to the stage. Eliza Montgomery, the understudy who replaced Adelaide Thurston, offers one of the only glimpses of life after escape. She fled Springfield in April of that year, first to Chicago, then farther to Milwaukee, writing to her sister that she still wakes some nights convinced I hear them rehearsing. That perfect, terrible harmony that seems to open something in the mind that should remain closed. Her doctor called it trauma. Montgomery called it truth. She stayed away from music for nearly a year, refusing even to play the piano. By 1900, she cautiously resumed teaching, but only piano, never voice. Her lesson notes preserved by family are littered with warnings. Avoid diminished sevenths in Chopin nocturnes creates dangerous resonance. Never combine E-flat minor with B major, opens doorways. Her niece Caroline later recalled Aunt Eliza was a wonderful teacher. But if students played certain combinations of notes, she would slam the piano lid shut and declare the lesson over. She called them forbidden harmonies. As kids, we thought it was superstition, but the fear in her eyes was real. Montgomery left explicit instructions in her will: burn the black notebook in her desk upon her death. It was destroyed in 1943. Her final words on the subject: some music was never meant for human ears. Some harmonies serve as invitations to entities that should remain beyond our perception. Her fate mirrors the central question of the Springfield case. What truly drove those performers to madness? Was it only suggestion and the fragile temperament of artists, or was something embedded in the building itself and the earth below it, shaping their perceptions? Dr. Eleanor Price, who in the 1980s pioneered the field of architectural psychoacoustics at MIT, called the Springfield Opera House the most compelling historical case on record. In her seminal book, Resonant Structures Architecture as Instrument, she proposed that certain geometric arrangements of walls and cavities create standing wave patterns, not just in the audible range, but at infrasonic frequencies below conscious hearing. These infrasonic vibrations, she showed, can trigger physiological and neurological effects, ranging from mild unease to profound alterations in cognition and perception. Her research team built a scale model of the Grand Opera House based on original blueprints and 1967 excavation reports. Testing revealed that the sub-stage chambers, as described by 1897 investigators, would have created a highly sophisticated system for generating infrasonic standing waves. The central chamber acted like a giant Helmholtz resonator, tuned to 712 Hz, the same frequencies laboratory studies associate with altered states of consciousness. The building didn't just carry sound, Price concluded. It played its occupants. And what of William Hargrove? The official record lists him as missing, presumed dead. But in 1978, researcher Thomas Gardner interviewed Sophia Hargrove, William's great-niece. She revealed a family secret. Months after his disappearance, his sister received a letter postmarked from New Orleans. Inside was a single page of music, written on a 12-line staff in symbols matching the lost 1967 score. The note read, "I have found the original company. Their performance is eternal, and now I am part of it." The music continues beneath, behind, and between what others hear. The family burned the letter soon after. Geological surveys in 1983 confirmed the presence of an extensive limestone cave system beneath downtown Springfield, some chambers directly under the old Opera House site. Lead geologist Dr. Robert Chambers documented whispering gallery effects, where sounds travel impossibly across distances, and resonance cavities capable of sustaining low-frequency standing waves for long durations. Survey records from 1820 and missionary journals from 1822 suggest that the Osage avoided the area entirely, calling it a place where the earth sings in voices that should not be answered. Even today, the site resists its own history. No musical performance has succeeded there since 1953. Tenants complain of strange acoustics. Employees describe humming or voices, especially in the northeast basement where the bank's vault once stood. Sound engineers have logged null points where sound dies completely, and hotspots where whispers are painfully amplified. One 1989 study by acoustical engineer Dr. James Kohler detected self-sustaining infrasonic waves at 7 and 12 Hz frequencies, known to correspond with brain wave patterns. He concluded the vibrations originated in the geological substrate itself, amplified by architectural nodes left from the Opera House. His attempts to publish the findings were rejected. Before leaving the field, Kohler reportedly told colleagues, "Some mysteries shouldn't be solved. The performers were right. There is music coming from beneath that building, but it's not meant for us." The Grand Opera House has been gone for more than 70 years, yet something lingers in fragmentary records, in persistent acoustical anomalies at its former site, and in the reluctance of Springfield residents to speak of what happened there in the autumn of 1897. As one elderly witness told a researcher in 1978, "Some music gets in your head and never leaves." That's what happened to those poor performers. They heard something they weren't meant to hear, and it's still singing inside them, wherever they are. Even today, the building may be gone, but the resonance remains pulsing just below the threshold of human hearing, as if the original company is still rehearsing, waiting for an audience that is yet to arrive. Local historian Sarah Mitchell, who interviewed longtime Springfield residents for her 2010 oral history project, noticed something curious. People would talk freely about other historic buildings, even those marked by tragedy, but mention the old opera house and conversations would falter. Elderly residents whose parents or grandparents had lived through the 1890s would change the subject, offering only vague recollections or excuses to end the interview. "We don't talk about that place," one woman told her flatly. Some things should stay buried. Mitchell's most revealing account came from Harold Jenkins, whose grandfather had worked as a stagehand at the Opera House from 1890 until 1896, leaving just months before the incidents of 1897. Grandfather never spoke of why he quit, Jenkins said. He'd talk about the shows, the stars who came through Springfield, but not about why he left. "Once when I was 12, I found an old opera program in his desk. He snatched it from me, threw it in the fireplace, and said, 'That music isn't finished yet. It's still being performed somewhere, and the less attention we pay it, the better.'" The most recent chapter in this strange history unfolded in 2015, during renovations to the modern building that now occupies the site. Construction workers breaking through a basement wall uncovered a small sealed cavity containing a single object, a tuning fork mounted on a wooden base with 1897 carved into the grain. According to the foreman's report, one worker struck it out of curiosity. The tone it produced was low and piercing, a vibration that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but inside the skull. Everyone nearby felt instant nausea and dizziness. The fork was hastily resealed in the wall and the opening filled with concrete at the owner's insistence. Sound engineers from the University of Missouri later analyzed recordings made near the site and discovered frequent equipment malfunctions. Audio technician Robert Simmons described frequency artifacts that shouldn't exist. Harmonic overtones with no identifiable source, always in the same locations. These technical anomalies, he noted, corresponded exactly to areas where occupants reported feelings of unease or the sense of hearing faint, distant singing. Even musicians passing through Springfield have reported similar experiences. In 2018, classical pianist Maria Gonzalez visited a cafe that now occupies part of the ground floor. She later posted on social media that she heard music that wasn't playing complex harmonies emerging from the hum of conversation and clatter of cups. "The melody was unlike anything I know," she wrote, "yet it felt familiar, as if I'd always known it. When I hummed quietly, it felt like something was singing with me." Gonzalez left after half an hour complaining of nausea and disorientation. That evening, during her concert at Missouri State University, she improvised a short encore that left professors stunned harmonically. Alien, dissonant, yet magnetic, Gonzalez had no memory of playing it and was unable to reproduce it later. Requests from paranormal researchers and acoustic scientists to investigate the site have all been denied. The property management's official statement is simple. For liability reasons, no paranormal or acoustic studies are permitted on the premises. The refusal, of course, has only fueled further speculation. Dr. Patricia Whitmore, an acoustical engineer who has studied historical theaters across the U.S., offers perhaps the most rational assessment. Many elements of the Springfield phenomenon can be explained by acoustics, standing waves, resonant frequencies, and the effects of infrasound on the human nervous system, she said. But the persistence of these effects over more than a century across multiple buildings suggests something we don't yet fully understand. Whether it's a unique geological resonance or something else entirely, the Springfield Opera House remains one of the most significant and disturbing cases in acoustic history. What happened in the autumn of 1897 endures as both mystery and warning. The records show that something in that building, its design, its foundations, Or perhaps the ground beneath it drove artists past reason. It consumed William Hargrove, shattered the sanity of his performers, and still echoes faintly in the spaces built over its ruins. The Missouri State Hospital archives contain one final chilling footnote. Richard Harrison, the tenor confined after his breakdown, remained mostly silent for years. But on the night of November 3, 1910, 13 years to the day after Hargrove's disappearance, staff reported hearing him singing alone in his room. The night attendant described it as the most beautiful and terrible music I have ever heard in no language I recognize. It lasted nearly an hour before fading into silence. When nurses checked on him the next morning, Harrison was dead. His expression one of serene satisfaction, as if he had finally completed a long-awaited performance. Witnesses swore that for hours after his death, faint singing could still be heard near his room, though no source was ever found. Dr. Samuel Wilson, who had treated Harrison throughout his confinement, added a final note to the file. In one of our last coherent conversations, Mr. Harrison told me, "The opera never ends. The performance continues eternally, waiting for the right audience." They found a better chamber now than any architect could design. I did not understand him then. I fear I do now. Over a century later, no one can say for certain what still stirs beneath the streets of Springfield. But when the night is quiet and the air hangs still, locals whisper that if you stand on Jefferson Avenue and listen carefully, you can feel a faint vibration underfoot, like the heartbeat of something vast and patient, still rehearsing, waiting for its cue. Because some music, it seems, never stops. It only waits to be heard.